Now, we've been hearing it all over the internet. Who actually deserves to be the number one pound for pound fighter? Is it Islam Makhachev or is it Alex Pereira? Today, we're going to go ahead and answer that question. But before we do, all I ask is you guys subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment under this video, and let me know what you guys think. Who do you guys think deserves to be the number one pound for pound fighter in the entire UFC? Without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the discussion. First things first, I think we just have to go ahead and give Alex Pereira his props. He's had an amazing 2024. He's probably going to be, fighter of the year. He's probably the face of the entire UFC right now. He put the organization on his back and pretty much saved a lot of UFC main events. He had an amazing performance this year in UFC 300 where he knocked out Jamal Hill. He then I think saved UFC 303 or 304. I don't remember which one it was, where he knocked out Drew Prochazka again. And then recently, he beat Khalil Roundtree in a fight that was, pretty entertaining. So yeah, let's go ahead and give Alex Pereira his respect. But let's go ahead and break down this argument on who actually deserves to be the number one pound for pound fighter. Let's go ahead and start off first with the entire light heavyweight division, because I think this is a very interesting point. Now, in my honest opinion, the light heavyweight division is a division that doesn't have too many elite fighters. And I know what you guys are going to be saying. How the hell did I come up with that assessment? Well, I could tell you guys it's pretty easy. The light heavyweight division is a division with the least amount of active fighters. Let's go ahead and count them. There is 34 active fighters in the UFC right now. And of course, Alex Pereira is at the very, very top. Now, this calls to question on the actual, I guess, eliteness in fighters at the very, very top. I really don't think that the light heavyweight division is too crazy when it comes to actual quality of fighters, if I'm just being completely freaking honest. And that's because of the lack of competition. We see a lot of redundant matchups. And in my opinion, there's really no traction in the light heavyweight division besides people like Alex Pereira and, of course, other fighters, especially in the top 5, that are just pushing the division forward. But I'm just going to go ahead and be completely honest and say that there are not that many good fighters in the light heavyweight division, especially when it comes to, pure skill. Now, we got to go ahead and pretty much look into Alex Pereira's resume, because I just wanted to go ahead and mention the fact that there aren't that many elite fighters in the light heavyweight division. Yet one of the more, I guess, prevalent arguments out there is that Alex Pereira beat a lot of former champions, and therefore, because he did that, he should be higher on the pound for pound list over Islam Makhachev. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting, because some of these performances, even though they are against former champions, we have to be, a little bit weary on how we pretty much weigh these wins, because there is a lot to be said whenever we start applying context to them. Now, of course, Alex Pereira had a good path towards fighting Israel Adesanya, and this was a great win for him, man. That fight against Israel Adesanya was absolutely great, because at the time, Israel Adesanya was one of the more active champions, and Alex Pereira coming in and beating him the way that he did, was absolutely amazing for him. That's where he gained a lot of his fans. But then he goes back and gets the rematch and obviously gets knocked out. Unfortunate, and he goes up to light heavyweight and he pretty much gets exposed for not having the best wrestling or grappling. I mean, we all knew that, Alex Pereira is a striker. He's not a grappler, wrestler type fighter. But that pretty much exposed a lot. It exposed that Alex Pereira, needed to work on his grappling and wrestling. If, Alex Pereira has made strides on that department is yet to be known, because, of course, we haven't seen him fight a fighter that has a similar base to Jan Blachowicz. And, yeah. So let's go move on to this point of the video where things start to get interesting, because I'm going to start applying a little bit more context. And this is where, pretty much a lot of the arguments are coming by, especially on the argument on whether or not Alex Pereira deserves to be the pound for pound best fighter in the UFC. So let's go ahead and give context to some of these wins. Of course, these wins are very important. They're huge wins for Alex Pereira per se. But, there is, some things to be said. So the first fight he gets against Jiri Prochazka, we just have to go ahead and mention the fact that Jiri Prochazka didn't almost fight for like a year because he had a major shoulder injury. And of course, he had to give up the title around this time. And that's where we saw Jamal Hill pretty much take on Glover Teixeira. And of course, Jamal Hill became champion. Jiri Prochazka was on a long layoff when he came back. He fought Alex Pereira and, of course, lost. Now we move on to Jamal Hill, which of course, he was coming back from a major injury because he had an ACL tear, one of the worst injuries you could have as an athlete, period. And he was also on a very long layoff. He comes back, challenges Alex Pereira at UFC 300 earlier this year, and of course gets knocked out. But that's against a fighter that had a ACL tear coming back after a long layoff. I don't know how you guys weigh that win, but in my opinion, I don't weigh it too heavy in my honest opinion. Because look, Jiri Prochazka, good fighter. In my opinion, he's not elite by any means. I mean, this guy fights with his freaking hands down. And Jamal Hill, with all due respect, uh, this guy crosses his feet a lot. And it's something that we shouldn't really be seeing at the top, right? We shouldn't really be seeing, fighters make blatant mistakes positionally. Yet these two fighters, Jiri Prochazka and Jamal Hill, they make consistent, textbook mistakes, in my honest opinion. But anyways, we move forward. The fight that he had at UFC 303 against Jiri Prochazka, of course, we know he got the knockout, but this was a short notice fight. Now, obviously, Alex Pereira, made a highlight on that fight. A lot of people are gonna get on my ass probably for saying this, but since it was a short notice fight and neither fighter had, the long, grueling camp to prepare, we can't really say that if Jiri Prochazka had the camp that he would have been a little bit more competitive. He would have been a more competitive opponents against Alex Pereira. So even though Alex Pereira got a good win, I really don't weigh this win too heavy, especially whenever we're talking about pound for pound best fighter. Now, of course, we know that this past weekend, Khalil Roundtree fights Alex Pereira. He had no business fighting for the belt, yet he was looking really, really good against the champion, right? And Khalil Roundtree, in some moments even looked like he was gaining momentum, especially in round one and round two. It looked like he was definitely gaining momentum, yet he went 4 rounds against Alex Pereira. Obviously, that's going to point out the fact that the light heavyweight division right now has a ranking issue. It has a shallow talent pool issue, and it obviously has a bottleneck ranking issue, right? So Alex Pereira is the champion of a division that, in my opinion, doesn't have the craziest amount of talent, the craziest amount of development, or the craziest amount of skill, pure skill, if I'm just being completely honest. Now, I am not at all saying that Alex Pereira's wins are bogus because he's just doing what he needs to do, to pretty much establish a legacy in the light heavyweight division. He's beating the who's who of the division. But I will say that I don't think that some of the fights that he's had, in the last 2 years pretty much outweigh the wins that Islam Makhachev has had in the last couple of years. I still think that Alex Pereira's best win so far is against Israel Adesanya, and that was back in 2022 because at the time Israel Adesanya was ranked the number 2 pound for pound fighter in the entire UFC, and of course Alex Pereira was able to knock him out, but then he got knocked out in the next fight. So say what you will. I still think that Alex Pereira deserves to be the number 2 pound for pound fighter, but we're gonna go ahead and transition to Islam Makhachev's I guess situation right now and why I think he is still the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the UFC. It really is night and day whenever you compare the lightweight division and the light heavyweight division in terms of quality of fighter. Because, like I said, I feel like the light heavyweight division has a shallow talent pool, and that's just me being completely freaking honest. And that's the fact that they only have 34 active fighters. They have obviously a bottleneck issue with the rankings and a shallow talent pool, in the entire division. Now, if we compare that to the lightweight division, I mean, it's just night and day, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most active division in the entire UFC. So obviously the best of the best, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be at the top. The best of the best are going to be absolutely at the top. And especially in the top 10 is nothing but freaking killers, ladies and gentlemen. We got Rafael Fiziev. Of course, he had a couple fluke performances, but I don't think anybody doubts the fact that fighters like Rafael Fiziev, Mateusz Gamrot, Dan Hooker, Beneil Dariush, even though he is in a two fight losing streak, this guy was at a point, going to fight for the title. Dustin Poirier been in the top 5 for years. Justin Gaethje been in the top 5 for years. Charles Oliveira been on the top 5 for years. Arman Sarukian, a young phenom that could potentially fight for the title soon. Max Holloway, of course, we don't really need to say anything about that. Max Holloway, quality fighter, and of course, Islam Makhachev sitting right at the top. Ranked guys in the top 10, all killers in terms of development. I just feel like they're more complete fighters compared to most of the fighters in the light heavyweight division. And we're gonna go ahead and look into Islam Makhachev and some of his big wins and some of his biggest wins, and why I think that right now he is pretty much the champ of the most developed fighters in the entire UFC. Um, we're going to go ahead and break this down right now, ladies and gentlemen. So, of course, we could look at these early fights of Islam Makhachev. Of course, he has some really, really good wins here. He has wins over, I guess, Arman Sarukian a couple years ago. That was really, really good. He has wins over Dan Hooker. He has wins over Charles Oliveira. This is a very interesting fight. Now, I want to highlight this fight because I feel like a lot of people overlook this fight a lot, because we have to understand this, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Oliveira, whenever he fought Islam Makhachev, a lot of people thought that Charles Oliveira was going to win this fight, because Charles Oliveira at this point in time was the number 3 pound for pound fighter in the entire UFC. This was at the time when Charles Oliveira had beat Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and those are all fighters that pretty much were fighting for the title earlier, if not that they were or they had been in the top 5 for years, especially Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Not only that, Islam Makhachev dominated Charles Oliveira. He dominated him in the striking, and he beat him in the grappling, where a lot of people thought that Charles Oliveira was going to have the advantage. Mind you, this was it was a really, really good win for Islam Makhachev, because not only did he beat a former champion, he beat a guy in the top 3 pound for pound fights currently. At the time, Charles Oliveira currently was the number 3 pound for pound fighter in the entire UFC. So we have to highlight that. Then after that, he goes on and has a super fight against Alexander Volkanovski. And it was a super fight, ladies and gentlemen. Let's pretend like this fight doesn't exist. Let's pretend and this fight doesn't take place yet. And let's talk about all the context behind this fight and why it was a big win for Islam Makhachev. At this time, Alexander Volkanovski was the number 1 pound for pound fighter. He was a champion of the featherweight division. And of course, he was moving up to challenge Islam Makhachev for the title. Now, this fight was absolutely amazing, because when Islam Makhachev beat Alexander Volkanovski the first time around, Alexander Volkanovski was the champion, like I just said, and he was the number 1 pound for pound fighter. And in terms of skill set and in terms of development, Alexander Volkanovski obviously is one of the who's who's in the UFC, one of the best MMA fighters, period. And Islam Makhachev, I think in this fight, I can't say that he completely dominated Alexander Volkanovski, but he definitely won the majority of the round. So it was a really, really good wins, back to back, against 2 fighters that were inside the top 5 pound for pound rankings at their time. Not only that, he gets the rematch against Alexander Volkanovski a couple of months later, 10 months, 9 months later, and he knocks him out. But whenever we see Islam Makhachev knock out Alexander Volkanovski this time around, we see things that Islam Makhachev hadn't done yet. In this fight, Islam Makhachev pretty much gave us some very big hints that he made large strides in his striking. Now, Alexander Volkanovski in the second fight was still in the top 5 pound for pound best fighters in the UFC. So that was just back to back to back huge wins against fighters that were currently in the top 5 pound for pound rankings overall. Now, of course, we had to talk about the fight that he had against Dustin Poirier back at UFC 302, and this was a very big win for Islam Makhachev as well. He defended his title. Now, in my opinion, I feel like Islam Makhachev should have had a bigger, more threatening, I guess, opponent, but it was a good win for him nonetheless. In this fight, he pretty much outstruck Dustin Poirier, a fighter that's pretty much known for his striking. And Islam Makhachev was able to beat him in the striking department. He was able to beat him in the grappling department. And mind you, Dustin Poirier had been in the top 5 rankings in the lightweight division for a long time, for years, ladies and gentlemen. And like I said, when Dustin Poirier was in the top 5, a couple of years ago, that's whenever the lightweight division was in its glory, ladies and gentlemen. That's when the lightweight division was the #1 division in the entire UFC, and Dustin Poirier managed to stay in the top 5 until this year. Of course, he's going to have his final fight in the UFC. It's a different topic for a different video, but Dustin Poirier he was a very, very consistent fighter since then. Now, in my honest opinion, I still feel like Islam Makhachev's wins, especially in the last couple of years, way more than Alex Pereira's, because he's managed to beat, former champion, and of course, fighters that have been in the top 5 for years, as well as back-to-back wins over Alexander Volkanovski, who was in the top 5 pound for pound rankings when he fought him the last 2 times, and against Charles Oliveira, who was ranked the #3 pound for pound fighter in the pound for pound rankings, and of course was a former champion in the lightweight division. Pretty much to sum up my argument, ladies and gentlemen, Islam Makhachev has beat the better quality fighters without a doubt. I still think that Alex Pereira getting wins over former champions is big, but they don't weigh as much as getting wins as some of the quality fighters that Islam Makhachev has had, especially in the last couple of years of him being champion, in my honest opinion. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree with some of the points that I've made in this video? I know there's a lot to go over. I think that I repeated myself a whole lot of times in this video, but that's because I just want to reiterate some of the points that I'm making. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, it's a pleasure. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Peace out, and have a good one.